I was upset not to see the Who. I missed it several times, and I saw the final rebroadcast of the Olympic ceremony, and I watched 2 hours of it waiting for the Who to come out, and then they said, we'll be right back with the closing, and then they cut away to some other show at 3 in the morning because they didn't want to show the ending of that.
It's crazy. Hey, I just started recording. Ooh. So, hello everyone. It's August something.
Exactly.
15th.
15th on the nose.
August 15th, and I think this whole thing might just be a little hot. There we go.
Cool.
And my name is Dan Boul. I'm president of 65 Amps, and we're joined today by my very good friend and esteemed colleague, Brian Kehew. Hey, Brian. Thanks for coming back, brother.
Thank you.
And so I thought we'd just do a couple things today. I got a prototype amp here, which I'm sharing. And I thought you guys would dig it. Oh, thanks for the birthday wishes. My birthday's on Sunday, actually, and Facebook's telling everyone that I'm already 47.
Jumping in there.
So it's not actually a London Pro. I just have that on there because people come here and take pictures of it.
Yeah. What's this amp doing for you? It's a little sparkly, spanking kind of sound, isn't it?
I'll let you guys guess. Oh, we're already getting the questions. What tubes? What tubes?
Sounds like EL84s. Nope.
Big tubes.
Big tubes.
Somebody got it right here.
It's got some brightness to it.
Yeah,
Somebody
we can probably turn it down.
Somebody guessed the same as I did too.
Producer concept with 6L6s.
That's interesting though, because it doesn't sound. 606 is a classic tube for a Fender type bassman kind of amp, and it doesn't really sound just like that. It sounds more English almost.
I can get this thing's really versatile. So I think we talked about it before. How I've gone down this road with high current and low voltage.
Yeah, because the tubes today really can't hold up to.
They can't take voltage.
Yeah.
They just don't do it.
Yeah.
And here's your sketch pad, sir.
Cool. We'll be doing some diagrams
Brian
later.
writes dirty limericks and stuff while we do the show. And so it became apparent to me, well, we got a really weird, something's not right.
It sounds just like a little bit of proximity makes the mic go boom.
Maybe we should put both our mics like this.
I think, yeah, it's still clear enough. Really good.
Yeah, it's good. I got enough compression on it to pull it up.
These mics have some kind of reach where they can hear you just as far as if you were close.
Yeah, so Dusty Wakeman from Mojave brought these over. These are MA101 MOSFET mics, which are really, really nice. I think we're just killing them.
Yeah.
So it became apparent to me at one point that if I'm going to stay in the amp business for more than 5 years, which I really plan on doing this till I drop, that the old school of designing was just going to prove to be impractical pretty quick.
You mean other old school meaning copying original designs or staying with the Marshall and Fender stuff?
Yeah, to some extent, but even just this fact that, there's a general paradigm that we all design around, at a macro level. If you go above Fender, Marshall, Vox sort of thing, what we do is high voltage, low current because it's cheaper to make transformers that way. And since we're way past the period when we were racing for volume, there's no need to make tubes sweat like that. And you know how hi-fis run high current, low voltage. Like I have that Dynaco ST70 that's 4 EL34s, and the B plus on it's like 280 volts instead of a Marshall, which would be 515.
Yeah, two times more.
Yeah. Easily. The only problem with designing around that is there's no off-the-shelf transformers to use. Yeah. So when most guys are designing amps, and I do it to a little bit, when I go over to Mercury and say, hey, I want to do something, but I want to get a transformer that sort of behaves like this one, but maybe built like that one, and I give them some few random sort of disparate specs, and they can come up with something, but it's always kind of loosely based on something that already existed.
When you ask for that, do you get a couple samples in different directions? Do they give you suggestions?
I get
Try
4.
This? Okay.
Yeah, I always do 4 from them, which is like $1,000.
Yeah.
And so I have to be smart. I have to do my homework before I say, here's $1,000, just blow it for me.
And the 4 changes are slight variations on the center point of what you gave them?
Yeah, well, it's really, like I know right around where I want to do the voltage, but because all my amps have the master voltage on it, I can always spec them hot, and then I can
back it down.
Excuse me. Oh, my back just did that thing.
Yep.
Pardon me.
Painful.
Yeah, I'm having back spasms right now. For those of you that think I'm drunk, I'm drunk too. I'm just having back spasms. But so I can dial in the voltage where it sounds the best, and then I go back to them. But I have different sort of, stack sizes. Winding types, coarse winding,
preferences you've already come up with that you figured out you like.
Yeah, I have certain things that I think act better in certain situations. There's no like all transformers sound better if you do this. Right. It's very situational. So in certain situations where I'm not getting a certain sort of frequency response that I want, I can say let's do this again but with really fine wire. Yeah. And that allows for much tighter grouping of interleaves. So instead of the interleaves being like this, they're like that,
Yeah.
And that makes a difference. Also, I play with, the thickness of the laminations on the stack. A coarse lamination will give you more of a mid-range sort of thing, and a fine lamination is going to give you a little more elegant, sophisticated sound, but the finer the lamination, the more expensive the steel is. Yeah. So we do all that stuff, but everything that anybody builds is based on this high voltage, low current thing, because current is what costs steel.
Yeah.
If you want to produce current. So on the producer, I found a voltage range where I really liked the tubes, but they were drawing so much current that the transformer wasn't working right. And I assumed if it had more current, it would sound better. We were above the current capacity of just a standard 2 EL84 type transformer. EL34 transformer. Mm. So I called over to Mercury, and they made me something. So my producer has 2 EL34s, but it draws more current than a 100-watt Marshall. And it's only a 28-watt amp, excuse me. So the big surprise was when these tubes are just bathing in rich current like this, they really perform. Mm. They do this. So this is a pair of 6L6s on the same sort of concept. You can hear it's like piano tone because I'm not pushing them at all.
A little more like a hi-fi sound than a mid-range tone. Yeah.
But I can push them a little hard. I don't have the foot switch working yet on this, but you see that light goes to red. I get a little more. Getting in traditional sort of Fender land right there. And I only have the volume on 4. If I push it harder, if I'm killing Ustream here or not. A little bit. Let me roll this back, just the whole thing. So you got, like Nashville sort of,
But it's interesting with the, all these things you're talking about, even the 4 transformers based around the spec you wanted are choices, personal choices you make.
Yeah.
And then how you set the amp is different. But even then the circuitry, the front end, the back end of the amp is all personal choices. And so there's so many ways to skin a cat, as they say, and it makes all these, unique things come out. If you had the exact rig of Jimi Hendrix or Eddie Van Halen, even your personal choices of how hard to play or what pick to use really can make that sound.
And it changes like automatically. When you pick up something different, your hands automatically adjust.
So I think there's, a good part of that and a curse of that. The curse of it is when you don't know what you want. Sometimes you can't tell the differences. But when I get in there, I always take an amp and I play with all the settings and just really, really work it out.
Oh, yeah.
And then figure out, this amp doesn't do so well on 10. It does great at 6 or something like that. Spend a lot of time playing with the options. But once I do...
We'll do this too,
There you go.
Oh, I'm just killing Ustream. I don't know what's going on with the mix today.
Is there a compressor on the guitar channel? Let's see.
Should be.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just the signal is so hot. Let me turn down Ustream a little bit. My board's not being pushed at all. That's better.
Yep. It's interesting. You can hear the. The whole drive has changed. The overtones have changed, but it's still got the same shape as that amplifier has from
That's
the
right.
output section.
Yeah, it still has the same sort of silhouette. You know?
Yeah. Which is good for if you've got a sound man who's trying to mix you out in front. You step on your pedal, that your guitar tone doesn't completely change.
Well, that's the thing when I have a problem with multi-channel amps usually because I love this channel but not that channel.
Yeah.
It never sounds like the same amp.
Or even, if you play with 3-channel amps, sometimes they'll have clean, dirty, and lead tone, and the clean tone can have a beautiful big bass end to it. And then you step on the crunchy tone, and it actually gets smaller sounding because the low end goes away.
Yeah.
Because of the way they've done it.
Well, a lot of times it's just cheaper just when you're doing printed circuit board just to make 2 different channels.
Right.
Because it's much less fragile than this is actually tubes running together, so every tube that's on is on the whole time here. I'm just changing
the tone.
Their inner relationships. So now that I'm on the 3rd channel here, or 3rd voice, which is channel 2 without the bump on, much more vintage Fender kind of thing, You got your. But then I can go back down to, Larry Carlton.
Yeah.
Let me turn off our mics for a second. You get the idea there, and it's a prototype, so it's not.
But even though when it's like cleaner, more Stonesy sounding, kind of sparkling, it still has that kind of roll off on the high end and the same kind of bottom end roundness to it, but not a big thumpy huge bass.
Yeah. So let's see. The Producer is the best channel switching amp in terms of maintaining tone coherency I've ever used. I'm assuming this is a similar experience. Yeah, Steve, that's exactly it. This is really similar to the Producer, to make a confession. The Producer turned out so well, it seemed like a good platform to sort of go vertical. Yeah. It's not exactly the same circuit, but it's the same sort of paradigm.
Concept,
and it works great. We did the 6L6s, completely different transformers, made a lot of changes internally.
That's one of the challenges too when you're even using pedals in front. Most people have done that as well, a pedal board in front. And if you're using it mostly for a clean amp sound or a basic rhythm tone, and then you step on the big fuzz tone, you can add so much low end that doesn't really fit. Although it sounds good to you and feels good to your fingers, if you step on it and suddenly your high end goes away, but it's thick fuzz, it's really hard to mix in front. Or it actually might sound to you like your guitar got bigger, but to the people in front, your guitar kind of disappears in the mix because those frequencies are gone that make it cut through. So it's a real challenge to get things like pedals and distortion right with an amp as well too. Not just from your own perspective, but especially from the sound guy or the lead singer who might think that you got too loud when you just turned up the fuzz just a little bit. Instead of volume, it's different frequencies.
Also, if you ever played gigs, just the amount of treble you need on stage versus when you're sitting alone by yourself is night and day. Because when you've got cymbals and PA and everything else going on, if you don't have a lot of treble in your amp, I kicked on my Strymon reverb down.
I was going to say, it's very distant now.
Let me mix it a little better. Oh! hurts. Crud. That's so mellow. Do a little. Very wet mix, isn't it?
So it's about 40 watts this amp?
No, it's 26.
Oh, good. So
27.
dial back from our studio stuff or club size gig.
It's loud enough to play any gig you need.
Yeah.
I know so many guys, no, I have to have a 100-watt amp. When I go look at their settings, you know, the guys, artists that come in here, you have to make me a 100-watt amp. That's all I've ever used. Okay, and I go look at it, and the master volume's on 2. Well, why don't you open this thing up? Oh, I can't. It's too loud. So why is it that you need a 100-watt amp?
Interesting.
And man, my amp doesn't have any body. It doesn't sound right. It doesn't sound sweet and rich. I'm like, well, yeah, because you've got the master volume on 2. It's breathing through a straw right now.
It's also a huge factor. I used to work at a music shop where we had, I think, 600 amps going on, and most of them old ones, vintage ones. And you pick a given Marshall head, and you know, a 100-watt head could be very loud given this one, and very quiet given that one, the tubes in it and the transformer. And so there is no straight reference for what 100 watts would sound like. Each one's very different. But then we would also plug in speaker cabinets. You go through 6 cabinets, and one would just be blowing your ears off. And then another one would be like almost like an attenuator. It would be so dark and warm and thick that you would actually, it'd be at half volume with this, just a different cabinet.
Well, for example, like a lot of guys really like to play 100-watt Marshalls through greenbacks. And the efficiency rating on a greenback, I think, is 97 dB, 98 dB, versus a G12H30, which is the heavy magnet one. The efficiency rating on that's 102.
So again, with the same amount of input, it has twice as much volume.
And so, there's a lot of choices in there.
And again, when you say a lot of people like a 100-watt into the 25-watt speaker, it's not necessarily as loud then. If you're plugging it through a vintage or a 25-watt cabinet, it's half as loud. That's why Hendrix didn't have that much volume as it looks like he might have had.
That's true. Well, he, when he played at Monterey, he was playing 100-watt Marshalls that were actually 250-watt Marshalls in one box. It had 2 output transformers because they didn't know how to make the big output transformer yet. And his cabinets were all Alnico Blues, which Alnico Blues are 102, 103 SPL, so they're hugely loud.
Strong output.
And he was just blasting there. And then over time, he went from that to H's.
With double 50-watt amps at that point into the efficient speakers.
Yeah, so a lot of people really think, that's a sound they want to emulate is the early Hendrix stuff. And even towards the end, he was still using G12H30s, which, the heavy magnet ones, they're really, really efficient. So he's just playing louder than hell. But I like the sound of a low-powered amp and a really efficient speaker because you really hear all the detail and you get a lot of touch response and dynamics and all that.
Not to mention there's a given factor, and we all know about when things are too loud. If your only sound is when you get the amp up to 9 or 10 that you really like, and the neighbors and the studio and whoever else you're with on the stage can't put up with it.
Or if you're over 29. You can't take it anymore. I just get ill. We had that Marshall Major in here a few weeks ago, and we got it working. We had to hook it up to 2 412 cabinets because it would blow up. There's my back. Sorry. And I played it without headphones on, standing behind it for maybe 120 seconds.
Wow.
And I was nauseous after that.
Feeling it.
And then I thought, okay, I put on shooting headphones, and I could play it for about another 2 or 3 minutes, and it was just. I couldn't do it. It sounded beautiful. I mean, it was wonderful.
That Marshall Major is 200 watts.
Yeah.
So, it's a monster.
So I've been getting grief ever since I started this company about why don't you do a 6L6 amp?
Yeah.
And, I got to be honest with you. I don't like the way 6L6s distort. The distortion always sounds ratty, always sounds fizzy, and not particularly musical. And so one of the things I wanted to show off on this, and again, it's in a prototype stage, but this does not sound like 6L6s.
No.
I mean, that's pretty smooth and controlled. I'm still not giving him enough over here. Let's do a little more. But I'll run a Les Paul into it in a second, and let's just switch over to a humbucker right now for fun. So that was the big hurdle, and when we go low voltage, all of a sudden these tubes get really, really cooperative and much more fun.
Well, it's a different. I mean, so many amps are replicas of something older, at least based upon that.
Right. It's not a Fender circuit.
We tend to stay in the same sound territory, even though we're not inventing something completely new here. This sounds like a classic rocking guitar tone.
Yeah.
But it is different. I mean, I was jumping
it's a different sound. Yeah.
A question about, are these those other tubes? And several people said the same thing too.
Right.
Just on the sound of it, that we're not used to these sounding this way.
Oh, yeah. Well, I love that surprise element because, like with the producer, I got a clean sound out of EL34s that no one had really heard before. And this is sort of the opposite of that. Now I'm getting a dirty sound out of 6L6s that I think is kind of unique. Granted, it's a prototype, so please be forgiving on the noise and hum and all that stuff, but... You've got the really crunchy headphones too, so it doesn't sound near as bad as it does in those headphones.
Not bad sounding. Somebody asked to please explain the knobs and controls as they are right now. Are they going to change as well? Or same?
It's pretty close to what it'll end up being. Oh, that's Charles Rivera in Puerto Rico. That's our friend Charles. He's one of our dealers. Hey, Charles, ¿cómo estás, brother?
So let's go through those controls just for those that want to know. If you can't see, we'll just read them off for you. First coming up.
Oh, those labels aren't even correct.
I was going to say
it's a total spy amp.
Yeah.
I do this with all my prototypes because on one year, we had a lot of people come through the shop, and some guy took a bunch of pictures, put it all over the gear page, and totally gave it away. And then, not coincidentally, two large amp manufacturers and a couple small ones ended up with something almost identical to what I made.
Yeah.
And then I even went to, I registered my names, the trademark on all of them, and somebody had a picture of it. And this particular gentleman went and registered that name for one of his amps about 2 weeks after that picture ended up on the internet.
Wow.
And he didn't release the amp with that name for about 2.5, 3 years afterwards. But just to be a nerd.
Just trying to grab it and lock you down.
Yeah, and so when I released it, he had to say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I've already registered that." Oh, really? Because I did a trademark search. I used to be an IP attorney wannabe, and I know this. He goes, "Yep, no, check it out." I was like, "You mofo." So now it's a spy. It says London Pro, and some of the labels are wrong. But on the right side, it's volume, treble, and bass. So the volume's on 4, the treble's a little over 6, and the bass is just a little bit in between 5 and 6. The second channel is just volume and tone, which is sort of my favorite sort of dirt channel. I don't think you need a lot of regulation on distortion. If you got your tubes acting correctly, with good transformers and good caps, you just... back spasm. You let them do their thing.
Right.
If you're not using good components, then you really have to squish it to keep the bad behaviors out. But
it often seems too that when you see an amp with 36 knobs on the front and a few on the back, which I like when you see companies, they run out of room on the front, so they put a few on the back, like Presence or something.
Yeah. That's great on stage, isn't it?
You do get a lot of control, but the overall result is not as good. You've played a lot of old amps that have volume and tone even. It's just such a great sound. And you go, well, I wish I could tweak this or that. Well, if you could tweak all those different parameters, it wouldn't have that great tone. So it is a trade-off for some people.
Yeah.
But really, when you get comfortable with your playing, you adjust for it by having the right speakers, the right guitar, the right positioning.
Well, you also have to play the instrument, which no amount of knobs will make up for that.
Yeah.
So if I can get a clean sound out of the dirtiest amp in the world just by playing the guitar. And I can make really clean amps to start. But that sounds like a Les Paul, doesn't it?
Now, surprisingly to me, and I got this from listening to old Fleetwood Mac tracks, was that the Les Paul makes a really good clean tone when it's a really good Les Paul. They're famous for being a big distorted guitar, certainly because of the pickups. They have a high output for some Les Pauls. But the old ones are actually pretty low output guitars, and they're very hi-fi if you clean them up a lot. They're beautiful sounding. And then you go back to the guys that were using them, who were a lot of jazzy type guys.
There was one guy who really made it famous. His name was Les Paul.
Heard of him.
Yeah, and I don't think he ever really played dirty.
No, he was a very clean guitar player. Yeah.
This is a very dark Les Paul too.
Nice.
Something like that. But it's clean.
Did any of you get to go see the Les Paul auction online? That was quite interesting. They had it in Beverly Hills not too long ago. And I was contemplating spending money that I didn't have on something.
Did you go?
But I didn't go, but I got the catalog and then watched a bit of it online. But everything went for such high prices. They really
a lot of it was just junk, too.
Absolutely, but it made a lot of my friends feel good that they collect junk and they feel that their stuff will now be valuable too.
It was Les Paul's junk.
Yeah, true. I do know people, in fact, one guy I know bought a pile of stuff, and it was just generic assorted parts, and he paid not a very small amount for it. It was like over $1,000, maybe $2,000 for a pile of stuff, and inside were hand-wound pickups from Les that had never been used.
Wow.
And he sold them, the first pair, for much more than the first pile cost. So he did grow up. It was gambling, but...
sort of Storage Wars type thing.
It was, exactly. And the other stuff was pretty obvious. Here's a, Gibson Les Paul from this year, and everybody knew what it was. No questions asked. But it was fascinating. And they had certainly done a few tricks when I watched it. They had put the estimated price of everything extremely low.
Yes.
So it made you feel like, I could buy that.
I could buy one of Les Paul's guitars.
For $800. And everything went for 3 to 4 times that. Plus, they had a 25% buyer's fee, which is the highest I've ever seen.
Right.
Meaning if you bid $1,000, you've got to pay $1,250 to get it. And then you have state of California taxes if you lived here. So when you get wrapped up in the auction mentality, they really did a great idea, which is instead of trying to make the sellers feel good by jacking up the estimated price, they took it very low and said, here's a 50-year-old Stratocaster. It'll be worth $5,000 when it's actually worth 10 or 20 very easily, and it went for more than it should be worth because it was a Les Paul's.
That's right. So we got one nice comment here. Got the Recording the Beatles book. Highly recommended for us gearheads. Yeah, it's a great book. I still have it out here just in case we wanted to breach something in there.
This thing?
It's funny, Brian. I got to tell you, you're my friend and all these sorts of things, but reading Ken Scott's book has made me want to go back and read Years again.
Oh, okay.
Because I went through Years almost just sort of out of obligation because I'm a Beatles guy, but I'm really not that studio savvy. And now I'm reading Ken, he has little sidebars about all the technical bits.
Which is nice. He wrote a book, which is stories about his life and people he worked with. But for those of us who like to work and like to record at home or at a professional studio, he tells you a little bit about the microphones and a little bit about tricks he would use when recording. I
meant to sit down and just read the whole book over a weekend, and my life got in the way. But a couple of nights ago when I was in Missouri, I was reading the section about how he helped Trident come up with their new board, the Trident A-Range. A-Range, and... and talking about the pros and cons of the Red 33 and Red 31 or whatever it was versus that. And then I got out your book and, let me go see, let me go back and read about these consoles. And so thanks for that. It was great. Your work kind of keeps on giving.
You mentioned a strange thing just in dropping it, but I don't think you even know this, that the Trident A-Range is a very special mixing board first built for Trident Studios in London, where they did David Bowie, Elton John, Harry Nilsson, Queen records. All these great things were done there, and really good sounding records. They built their own mixing boards at one period, and then they started selling them to the rest of the world. So they made 13 is the famous number of all these consoles.
Yeah, one's over at East West, isn't it?
There's one at East West. There's one at, and so basically, one odd evening I was looking around at the people who were talking about these online, and this goes to show a bit about how internet works and what I've learned about researching things since doing this book. Internet research is good if you want to learn about guitar pickups or something, but you can only trust people so far, and I find the information you get is pretty dubious. There can be good stuff there, but it's sitting right next to something equally valid looking that's wrong. Mm-hmm. And so when I went looking for...
And oftentimes the myth is more interesting than the truth, and people just go, oh, this is a better story to write or repeat.
So this story was told by everybody that there are 13 Trident A-range boards and no more, and I went out looking for where they were, because I'd worked on about 3 of them, I think maybe 4, in my lifetime, and they were always fantastic sounding, really unique and good sounding, but people make replicas of the mic preamps, replicas of the EQ. Mm-hmm. You can buy digital versions for software. And so I thought it was interesting, and people didn't know if somebody owned one of these boards, they'd paid a lot of money, easily upwards of $200,000, sometimes more, for the different boards.
Back then.
Well, this is now, because back then it was 70s money. I don't know what they were going for.
Yeah, probably still $50,000 or $25,000.
Very serious money. And so people that owned them didn't know their own history, and I love to dig into history, this kind of thing. So I started chasing the trails of 3 studios in Nashville used to have them, but none of them have it. So where did they go to? And one might be in Canada, one might be in LA. Mm-hmm. And I started tracking them, and finally, over the course of a few weeks, just for my own fun, I started looking up the history. And I found each of the boards and all the owners over time.
Really?
Which usually is 5 or 6. So, and a lot of people had thought that they owned... This is the one used by Elton John. This is the one used by David Bowie. Yeah. Well, no. Sadly, in most cases it wasn't true. And I think the person that owns the one that is doesn't know it, which is funny.
Were they mostly in professional situations, or was it just...
Completely, yeah. Except the one that was original, the first one used by those famous people, was chopped up and reconnected and built with another board. So at some point, 2 boards disappear and 1 board emerges. Yeah. And so forth. And yet, it's not that anyone is that special, but it's kind of cool to track it and find the history. And then meanwhile, while I was doing it, someone owns one up at a special music museum up in Canada, and they said, would you, please let us know what's going on with that. We need to do some grants and things like that based on our console. We want to build a music center, a recording center around this console, so we'd like to know the history. So I said, it happens, I have that, and I'll put it together for you in the next 2 weeks, although I'm hopefully doing it. These are called the Trident A-range mixing boards. I hope to do it for an article somewhere, but I think the information is getting so deep, it'll be too big for an article, and we need to spend, a page per console would mean 13, 14, 15 pages, because there may not be just 13. Yes. And counting the ones in the Vatican.
There's one at the Vatican.
A few little ones that might still be at the Vatican. I'm
That's
trying to
hilarious.
Find out. But the Vatican bought some.
Oh, Holy Father.
So
you sound so sweet.
Exactly. They have great sound there. And
because it's from God.
But it's one of those things where I'm sure they don't know what they have. It's probably just old mixing boards that they've always used in that conference room or something. Mm-hmm. And everybody would kill for it, for the little sidecar in their studio. But it's fun to dig up this stuff. And I just learned doing the research for the Big Beatles book here, and then this kind of project. What was on the web was about half reliable. Some really great leads there, and I found some good information, chased it down with other people. And then if you're friendly with people, I was calling up technicians and people that own the boards over and just saying, I just want to know what you have. What can you tell me? And I won't necessarily believe it, but I will take it with a grain of salt, write it down.
I'll put it in the algorithm.
And we'll trace it down and we'll check it against the facts. And then we'll give you back some information to try to make it healthy for everybody to get the stuff. So hopefully this will come together. But I think there's never been a book on Marshall amps, which I wish would happen. There are books on Marshall.
Doyle's book.
I know, but I mean, there's never been a book on Marshall amps that answers all the questions.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's time for the deep Marshall book.
And there have been people digging into Fender. There's at least a dozen books on Fender history, which are nice and fairly complete in certain channels. But Jim Ellier's Vox book, the Vox Guide book, is amazing. And it's all the questions you have about 60s Vox amps. Yeah. And we did that with the Beatles recording book. It's just, can we get rid of all the questions so you don't have to wonder about the microphones or even which rooms they were in or who worked on which album. Yeah. And so the questions are answered. So if anyone feels like it, a Marshall book, since they're such important amps to everyone and certainly been used and being used, you could even stop at a certain period and say we're going to stop 1980 or something if you want to make it
I'd
limited.
say anything before a JCM 800 would be of really good interest. Yeah.
And so, and the later stuff can be its own thing. But there was a guy, Dirk Dutton, who lives near North Hollywood. His family had Dutton's books.
Dutton books, yeah. Dory Dutton's my neighbor.
Oh, okay. So Dirk
family, yeah.
Dirk has an amazing collection of Marshalls, and for over 10 years he was working on that book to do the really detailed Marshall thing. At one point,
really?
I think it got beyond him as far as he was researching it and trying to interview people, but it got to be such a huge task, and it is a huge task to get done.
Absolutely. Well, I'm reasonable acquaintances with Michael Doyle, that wrote what's considered to be the best book so far. And similar dynamic. I remember him telling me, he's like, the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know, and the more you want to learn. But he's such an incredible Marshall freak. He actually named his son Marshall.
That's good.
But
I also know that in that book there's, not that there's no mistakes in any book, but significant number of, or even some amps that are not really purple Marshalls that are painted purple that were used for a photo shoot. But they don't tell you that. It is purple, but it's not an original purple Marshall and so forth.
Well,
so
I think for him the project was just a labor of love. He loves Marshall amps so much, and he's curious at kind of the level I am of, like, why do those transformers sound better?
Oh, yeah.
All that sort of stuff. But first step was just sort of cataloging what he could find. But yeah, his life got in the way. He started a family and couldn't turn that book into what it could be.
What's cool is it is a great picture book, and it's a great introduction to the Marshall history. So some people don't feel it needs to be done, but there's a lot of stories and a lot more accuracy about things that could be done.
Well, as long as Jim's still alive, too, it's a time to do it.
Yeah, and he's part of the story. Again, there were people that worked for him that designed amps when he was, a music store owner and a drummer, and a lot of people doing stuff. So, and a weird one is I was in London one time and ran into Ron Wood at some show and ended up talking to him about amps, and I mentioned the early Marshall stuff, and he said I used to shop at Jim Marshall's store, and I used some of his very first amps in his band The Byrds he was in, and he said I ordered the first 100-watt amps with these giant speaker cabinets.
Yeah, that was the 812 cabinet.
812 cabinet.
Yeah.
He said, yeah, and he goes, and then Pete Townsend came and took them.
Fuck.
And I thought, wow, because we know that Pete Townsend had probably the first ones, but he said, no, those were my idea and my concept. Now, whether that's true or not, it could be ego. But it's a great story to throw into the pot and then sort it out between them and ask people what the truth is. So
it's very interesting. Now, is there anybody? Oh my God, Fonzarelli. These guys sometimes come up with the best.
Mm-hmm.
Fonzarelli named his the producer. I love that. You're getting up there with Bassface Josh.
And Zach Wild named his kid Hendrix. That's good.
My ex-girlfriend named her dog after me.
But again, I'm talking a little bit about, we were talking about Ken's book and even doing the research for these Trident mixing boards is, I'm not an expert on the Trident mixing boards. I just became one, maybe the one, over 2 months of work. And it involved a lot of phone calls, some travel, searching up people who were salespeople, people who were technicians, people who worked at different studios. I would just look up an old studio, and then I would look up the list of names of who worked there, different albums down there, and then I would start calling and writing the producers and engineers who had done albums there.
Yeah.
Saying, did you take any pictures? Do you remember anything about the mixing board?
Any information.
And then some guy who was there for 2 weeks remembers it better because of the brief period when they were there, makes them more clear focused.
It was
than
an
someone who
event.
worked there for 20 years and can't remember.
Yeah, it was an event for them.
So although this guy, XYZ, may have owned the studio, they may not remember when the mixing board came in, but the technician said, it came in the same month I was hired, which was March 1976.
Mm-hmm.
Suddenly you've got your answer of when the mixing board came in.
Yeah. Is there anybody making replicas of that today that you think does a good job?
Daking makes a thing, Jeff Daking, which is a very close replica, but not exactly the same. People always argue about that.
Well, you can't make it exactly
And then
the same.
Malcolm Toft, who was an original designer of the Trident boards, is making his own hardware version.
Oh.
He's made one in the past that was semi-accurate, and they admit that it was close. But the ones currently being made or are supposed to come out this year are supposedly dead nuts accurate, but people say, could you do it the same? Is it really impossible? So then again, 95% is good. It's a great sound. It may be better, actually, for that last 5%. Who knows?
I'm sure if you... I'm trying to get comfortable here. Pardon my
The back.
uncomfortableness. I'm I'm sure if you compared all those 13 Trident boards side by side, they weren't even the same.
In fact, there were engineering changes as they went through the line. They started with the first one, which is the famous one that everybody would want, and it was the most troublesome. And it had problems with grounding and problems with noise. And so they figured that out, and as they went into production on boards, they made a set of ones this way, and then they changed a few things and made a set of them that way. And each one was basically custom ordered for people too. So people said, I want it this way, I want it that way. And you get some subtle variations. Because you're making a big order for this company, they're going to work on the board for 6 months. You can say, I want blue knobs, or I want 32 channels, or some special features for the switching.
Yeah.
So,
no, it's hard. It's, I have that conversation a lot with customers, I want to sound just like whomever. And I have to tell them, Eddie Van Halen doesn't sound like Eddie Van Halen anymore.
Right. True.
How are you going to do it? But just, somebody that catches that character would be good.
There was an interesting story which I'll probably put in this article, but the Trident A range is a very famous mixing board for a lot of reasons. But the two main ones are the mic preamp. People love the sound of it.
Yeah.
And then the EQ, which is a very weird EQ. It's got 4 bands, and they have sliders, so you can select a frequency and then boost or cut the treble.
Right. So it's got a shelf and a slider.
And then upper mid, pick a frequency, lower mid, and you get sliders to work with, which is kind of fun.
Cool.
And you don't have to go step, or click.
Right.
But it was unique for the time. Certainly choices made by the engineers that worked there, like Roy Thomas Baker, Robin Jeffrey Cable, Ken Scott, were top engineers and producers doing Bowie and Genesis and Queen. And they said, we want these frequencies for the treble. And they're working guys that are making hit records, so they're very good choices.
Yeah, I noticed that in Ken's book. He mentions, I can't remember what they are right now, but he's like, well, I always work in these frequencies.
Yeah.
It's just like, that's where his brain or his ears are happy. And they've got it down to a spot. Because I had Tom Swarovski here a few months ago, who's Brendan O'Brien's main guy now that Nick Didia has gone off to do his own thing. And he's just all about 700 hertz for guitar.
Wow.
And it's just like, really? He goes, Brendan taught me that. That's Brendan's thing. Brendan lives in 700 hertz for guitars. I said, really? That sounds kind of low. He goes, yeah, but, listen to it. And he showed me how to do it here on the board. And for the dirty sound, you'd mic it in the back, put it out of phase, and really take the EQ and just gnarl it so there's just 700 hertz coming through.
Wow.
I went, oh, yeah, there's a Stone Temple Pilots record.
Okay.
There's a Pearl Jam record, or there's a Soundgarden record, or whatever. It's like, that's Brendan's sound.
Fascinating. And again, it doesn't necessarily work for you and everybody else, but once you think that way, if somebody says there's a magic frequency, you can try it.
Yeah.
And see what it does. That's certainly not one I would even play with very often.
Yeah.
I tend to just leave it, whatever 700 hertz is. That range is usually okay when I've recorded it. I don't need to play with it too much. It's the deep lows or maybe upper highs.
He's got a separate channel all just set up, and he can push 700 in and out.
I'm going to write down a number for you guys, which is the magic frequency right here. See if you can read this. 3 kilohertz, 3,000 hertz.
3K, baby.
It's the magic frequency. And why is that magic frequency? Because it's where your human ear hears the best. And so when babies are crying or somebody's rustling through the woods about to attack you like a bear, that frequency gives you the best spatial localization. It gives you the best sensitivity. For some reason, that was our best frequency, so the ears have developed over centuries to be those
That's sensitive. The one that probably kept us from getting eaten.
It is. So that's why we hear the best. Most humans, depending on the size of your head and so forth, it might move up or down a little bit.
Some predator millions of years ago operated at 3K.
I use 3K as the magic frequency. Not that it's good or bad, but for example, somebody gives you a fuzzy guitar that's just wall of sound, and you can't really make a mix with it because it's eating everything up. Suck out 3K, and everything else will fit around it much better. Other times, if you have something that just sounds mushy and you can't get it to stick out in the mix, boost a little 3K, and that frequency will help it cut through without eating up the whole mix.
Wow.
So 3K is a very
you heard it here, folks.
Thing. It is a secret frequency.
That's it. This guy says, that's weird. That's the same frequency my wife when she yells.
Maybe why it can be annoying.
Save me from many fat girls. Oh, I love these rude comments. It's fantastic.
Now, maybe we should make a box that's just plus 3 dB at 3K and minus 3 dB at 3K, and you can just
oh yeah. Well, so yeah,
kick it in or out.
After I'm a big fan of Brendan's guitar sound. regardless of what you think about the artist that he works with, he's one of the guys that was able to somehow put the guitar like just right up your nose in the mix without killing you.
Yeah.
And so I went down to Tour Supply and I had Dwayne modify my Boss graphic EQ pedal so that the one slider was just 700 hertz. And
good.
I could do the whole thing. It's very cool. I got a couple questions here about the amp maybe I should talk about for a second, but I have some other thoughts about Ken's book I wanted to share with you.
Let's do both. Amp and book.
Something, where did it go? Oh, hey Dan, I'm late. Let's try a prototype. Okay, I'll get to that in a second. Do you notice any tonal differences from the exact amp of the other, say, producer? Noticed from one exact amp? There's always shades of gray. I mean, we go to really unusual lengths to make them consistent. But I can't keep them perfect. It's impossible. There's sort of we operate in a very, very narrow range that I think is probably 10% the footprint of what most amp companies work in and consider to be acceptable. I've got a lot of things. If you look inside the amp, I can show you. But everything outside the tone path is really, really high quality 1% mil-spec parts. Also in the power section, that's a huge difference. A lot of guys think, the power section's not important. I just use any power. As long as I get my voltage, I'm happy. But the components you use in the power section dramatically affect all the behaviors down the line because that's what's feeding all of these other engines that are here. And so I use, like flame-proof, wire-wound, silicone-coated 1% mil-spec resistors that are made by Vishay Dale. So they're full-on mil-spec approved stuff because they don't drift when they get hot. And they're also not flammable, which is nice when you have tubes arcing all the time. But so it makes it very reliable. And then outside of the tone path, I use same thing, Vishay Dale sealed resistors. So they're not affected by temperature as much. They're not affected by humidity as much. They're not. They don't drift. And then in the actual tone path, I use the Allen Bradleys. But I've got the 5% Allen Bradleys that I bought. I think I told you this. I bought hundreds of thousands of these, and they're the 5% ones, which were the primo military ones that they used in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And if you go over to most places and order Allen Bradley resistors, they're the 10% tolerance ones. So
which means, if you order something which is 100 for a value, it could be a 90 or actually be 110.
Right.
And you'd never know unless you measure it.
Right. And then so you multiply that down the line of 25 resistors, you can end up with just wildly different results.
Yeah, because you could have an amp down, it's down 10% in volume at this point. It's down 10% there. It's down 10%. Just by the randomness of it, you might have an amp that's really weak and quiet.
It's 50% different.
Yeah.
And so the sound of the Allen Bradleys to me is worth the compromise of having the 5% tolerance, but I only use those in the actual signal path. So those aren't high voltage. Usually, a couple of them are, but they're usually not high voltage places. So if I keep it locked down to 1% everywhere else, I keep the amps really, as the circuits are perfectly consistent. It's the tubes that I have to worry about. So tonally, this amp acts a lot different than a producer. The circuit's very similar to a producer. I would say the overlap is probably 80%. But the transformers are wildly different. The only thing that they share is that it's high current. But the design of the transformer is wildly different. And the power transformer that's in here is not the one I'm going to ultimately use. The one that I'm waiting on is actually a lot better than this. So, but I'm just loving the fact that this sounds like a Les Paul. It's got all that bubbly thing, and then if I want to just heat this side up a little bit, I've got the. Again, you do have the crunchy headphones, so
sure,
be forgiving.
I know.
But it sounds like what it's supposed to. And then go all the way over to.
Got a good Billy Gibbons type effect to it, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I skipped over one voice when I did that.
Yeah.
You know, this is the full-on raunch. But yeah, you've got your... Doesn't sound like 6L6s at all, does it? So because they're literally just swimming in beautiful, clean current and the tubes aren't getting hot, they'll do so much more. It's really fun. So to me, the writing was on the wall. Like, if you don't do this, I'm hoping, you know, our amps are turning out good, but this is a paradigm that's sort of somewhat uncharted.
Yeah.
So I've been trying to get better and better and better at it and then translate it down. The other thing that everybody wants is lower and lower volumes.
Yeah.
So I think after we do this 6L6 one, I'm going to try to do this with EL84s. And I can get a 4 EL84 amp, which has the girth and the authority of an AC30, down around 10 watts.
I'm going to throw something out at you just because we talk about tubes and things. My favorite tubes have ended up being, on the small side of things, 6V6s.
Oh, yeah.
Which are really, like in old Fender Deluxes, for example, very sweet sounding and not so big sounding, but everything in the mid-range. If you think about an old Fender Deluxe, it's very mid-range, but round, smooth, beautiful sounding amp.
Oh, yeah.
Lots of the note, not so much fuzz and so forth like that. And then in my old Marshall came with these old tubes called KT66s, which are unbelievably unbelievable.
They're great tubes.
Basically,
it's a 6L6 that's missing a suppressor grid. The KT, you know, KT, I know you know this, but the KT stands for kinkless tetrode. And so the suppressor grid was put in to, you know, stop the bounce back of atoms that weren't getting absorbed into the plate, and that would cause a kink in the wave. So they put a suppressor grid there just to catch the overflow. And when they came out with the KT, people liked the sound of a KT better than a pentode, of a tetrode better than a pentode. So they came up with a way to get the kink out of the wave without using a suppressor grid.
Without the grid, yeah.
And so that's what a KT66 and a KT77 and KT88, and then we just did Jim's Marshall Major with KT120s.
Wow. That
New Sensor is putting out now that sounded fantastic. Like, it sparked a lot of really neat ideas I want to do there.
The one I have is is really early Marshall 100 watt. Early, and it's a PA head, but same kind of thing basically. It came with these tubes, and I'd never used KT66s before. And at the time I got it 15 years ago, you couldn't even buy them. I mean, even used ones were impossible.
Yeah.
But I wondered why, and so at one point we were shaking out my amp. My friend Steve Deacon, who's the rock and roll doctor in the neighborhood,
I know Steve,
took my amp and we said, let's just try out some different tubes in here. So we put in some EL34s, and suddenly it sounded like a British Marshall, and it was rocking.
Oh yeah.
And then we put 6L6s in, and it sounded like a Bassman. And then we put 5881s in there, which is the same kind of tube but older. It just sounded like a rounder full of, and then we put the KT66s in, and the sound just went and it opened up.
It's a wonderful tube.
It was almost like a hi-fi sound, not so raunchy and not so rock and roll, but it sounded like a very big
all of that you know, the JTM 45s were on those, and I've shied away from designing around those because modern ones are so wildly unpredictable.
The trouble, people can't find good ones. Yeah.
Well, you get a batch that's great, and then you get 10 batches that suck.
Wow.
And I just can't put out a product where I can't feel good
it.
about it, because I did an amp for a while called the Royal Albert that had KT77s in it. Wonderful tube, sounded like an old EL34 with hi-fi turned on, you know, like with the loudness control on. It was really, really nice, and for about a year, I got consistently great ones. And I sold them to tons of big artists. Rich Robinson from the Black Crowes, Keith Urban, Vince Gill, you know, like all these guys were playing them. And then all of a sudden, the tubes went off a cliff. And I called the manufacturer, who will remain nameless.
Now,
it's just a couple of consonants.
Were they just in tone, in output, reliability? What was the problem?
Well, the tone was always good, but the reliability went off a cliff. I mean, they just suddenly, you know, I designed the amp around 480 volts B+. Now, I could probably redo the amp like this, low voltage and high current, it'd probably be fine, which is, you can kind of see where the future of 65 is going to go. I'm kind of opening the kimono here a little bit, but it was horrible, and it was such a shame because they sounded way better than modern EL34s did at high voltage. And so now I'm terrified of that. I did the same thing. I made this amp called Rocket 88, which had KT88s in it. And we couldn't come up with a name for that amp, and we got the prototype done the day that Ike Turner died.
Yeah.
So Rocket 88, it just seemed to fit. You know, it was his first hit song. And I just posted a picture today on Facebook of a girl named Susie who plays in a band called Dead Sarah. And she plays the Rocket 88, and the tubes sound fantastic, but again, they're not reliable. Yeah. All of a sudden, they were good for a year, and then the manufacturer just went, yeah, screw it. You know, we're not selling enough of these to care. And so I went out and bought enough tubes to last her for like a decade.
And just stocked her up, yeah.
And we ran them all through stress testing and the whole bit, and so now she's set. But yeah, it's a shame because they're really good tubes. And the 66, unfortunately, falls into that category. Good ones are great, and then there's the other 90%.
It's scary.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's the truth in that with Les Pauls, for example, or Telecasters, which is my favorite guitar.
Yeah.
Most of them I don't like. And yet, when you find a good one, it's amazing, and you see why Bruce Springsteen and Keith Richards and people play them.
This is just a heritage reissue.
Yeah, but I mean, when you find...
But it's got that thing. And I've owned several 50s Les Pauls back when they weren't valuable.
Yeah.
And the sound's every bit as good. Yeah. And then I got the pickups here, the Tim White pickups, which made a big difference. But
it's one of those things where if you have time and you get a chance. I mean, when I was a kid, I was trying to buy a cheap Stratocaster, and I tried out 4 or 5 that just came into the shop. We unboxed them, and one of them out of the 4 was much better. And they're the same cheap guitar at the time, but you just got to take time and say, you can't always go try out every high watt amp you find. You can't put 5 of them side by side in most places and try the best one. But you should certainly start to trust your ears and say when you really, really know it, you really find a guitar that you love, which I have a few times in life, and you grab it and don't let go and sell some things to be able to afford it.
This is great. Oh, this is a good question here I'd like to go into for a minute. It says, when you say low voltage, high current, does current equal amperage? No, they don't equal amperage, but there's a reciprocal relationship if you've ever studied Ohm's law.
If one goes down, the other one has to go up. Or
to keep the same behavior.
Yeah,
Otherwise, you start to get bad behaviors. But think of it, for me, the best analogy, if I can distill it down, is that electricity has a lot of the same dynamics as water. And so, typical modern amps that are all high voltage, low current would be the sprayer that you use to clean your driveway. Mm-hmm. Voltage is the pressure on the electricity. It's not the amount of electricity. It has nothing to do with the amount of electricity at all. People really mix that up. And I understand why. It's easy to do. But the voltage is the pressure on the electricity. So when you have your power washer that you use in the driveway, you've got a little tube with a ton of, with water being forced through there really fast. And that's why you get all that force off the end, which is the same thing happens in a guitar amp. We put a lot of voltage to it, then you get more noise coming out.
Yeah.
And whereas high current would be the equivalent of a fire hose. A fire hose is a big round tube, but not a lot of pressure on it. It's just the pressure that we have off the mains in the thing. But it's the amount of water that puts out the fire. It's not the pressure on the water that puts out the fire. So what I'm doing here is I'm feeding these tubes with a fire hose instead of feeding them with a pressure washer. And all the analogies hold true. When you have a big, huge channel of water, look at how smooth and still a large river is versus a babbling brook that's going off a cliff. There's foam, there's bubbles. It doesn't fly straight. Whereas you look at a nice, smooth river, it's like glass. And so the tubes can benefit from that, but people have stayed away from it because it's expensive.
Yeah.
And if we're going to keep using vacuum tubes, it's sort of like, well, guys, if you want to have your cake and eat it too, then we have to change it. But so just like water, if you increase the pressure on the water, down to this little tube, then it doesn't need to be that much water going through there to get a big spray. But if you have a big, huge fire hose like this, it takes a lot of water to fill that hose. And so that's the amperage. That's the amount of water is the amperage, and the pressure on it is the voltage. And so tubes love current and hate voltage.
Yeah.
They can't take the pressure anymore. Just like an old hose where it starts to leak after a while and quits. And that's what tubes do. Mm-hmm. You put that much pressure on them, they just go, I can't do it. Mm-hmm. And the cathodes aren't made very well, so they strip really fast now. So when you run at high voltage, the efficiency of the tube just goes down really fast. I mean,
so you're trading off the voltage. In other words, he's saying that in bringing down the voltage, you have to give it more current, and you'll get the same output from the amp.
You're right.
It seems the same to the viewer and so forth.
Yeah.
And you have to lose one, drop that voltage to a safer level, and in order to make that work and sound good, sound the same, but essentially to most people, you'd crank up the current a bit to make up for it.
You have to have more available electricity to fill that hose because there's less pressure, And just like, when you turn the water down on your garden hose, you can see when that hose isn't full anymore.
Yeah.
Because there's not enough water to fill it up anymore. So like this, I got to push more water through that hose to make it work right. I know that's not 100% airtight analogy, but it works.
It's real close.
Yeah. But anyway, I'm just flipped about this prototype because I've been playing guitar for, how old am I?
12 years.
I've been for more than 5 years.
Yeah.
And since 1977, so 35 years. And I've never liked 6L6s. There's been the odd amp where I heard a bassman, like our friend Zeke Zarngable has a really nice bassman that just sounds fantastic, but it still wasn't great. It does that one thing so well, but I couldn't go out and make a living with it, unless I was playing in a Texas blues band or something. And now I finally got it, that Josh with the good comments. I love you, Josh. But, now I'm getting sounds that, when amps were designed around old tubes, it could take voltage, and the transformers didn't have silicon in them, and the resistors were all good, and it was all World War II surplus stuff. Yeah. It was fantastic.
Sure. So here's a good trivia question. See if anybody can answer this, and it's just for fun because we don't have anything super cool. What is the most common recorded Beatles app? Anybody know that one?
Here's the tension music.
The Mesa Boogie Mark 7. Yes, correct. No.
Mesa Boogie Mark 7.
The quadruple rectifier.
Beatle app. Yeah, that's right. I don't know.
What's funny is people often picture the AC-30, and the Beatles rarely used it, considering it's the most seen app at the Cavern period.
Please Please Me was the only record with AC-30s on it, right?
It's pretty early on they get away from them, but we so easily visualize them with those amps. They used AC-50s a lot more, AC-100s maybe even more than that, and it's not my favorite amp, but they used it a lot, and yet it's not a Vox amp that the Beatles used the most.
The most recorded one would be a Fender Deluxe, right? Or a Bassman.
Stranger still. Getting there.
A Bassman?
Somebody put it in there. Oh, there it is. Bassman. Somebody mentioned it. It is the cream-colored Bassman, 1964.
Yeah.
That Paul starts using, and you see it around the time of Revolver, even maybe Rubber Soul.
That's actually a 212 Bassman, too.
It is a 212 Bassman, about 40, 45 watts. Very simple. And Paul started using it, and very soon it mutates to be George Harrison's amp, and he keeps it from Sgt. Pepper on through the 70s. They've still got it at the house.
Wow.
And I did see it once, and it has a little tag on the top. It's definitely the same amp because the tag says Beatles Repair 1967 written in pencil on it. I was like, what went wrong? What happened? But you see it popping up all the way through the periods. John did use a Deluxe later on. They used some Vox solid state stuff even too, but consistently across 5 years, and even into, if you see the Imagine film, George is playing it with John Lennon and stuff. So it was a real favorite amp.
Speaking of which, a little bit tangential from what you're saying, I was on YouTube last night just surfing around, and there was no Neve Prees on a Beatles record, was there? But
not yet.
And there was a video there that Klaus Forman put up, and it was in German. And I speak enough German where I could listen to it, but he basically met McCartney over at McCartney's studio out in the country in England. It's called Hog Hill, I think, or something like that.
The Mill, that one?
Yeah,
it's got the
studio. Yeah, it's got the big Dutch windmill. Yeah. And so McCartney's walking through there, and he's just pulling blankets off of all this old gear. And he's like, "Oh, this is the harpsichord that we did."
Because
yeah, you've probably seen this. And he goes, "Yeah, the guys at EMI call me like from the back room, going, they're going to throw this crap away." "Oh yeah, sure, I'll pay for it." And so he's collected all of that crazy stuff that they recorded with, and he's got it out there. and he was doing some track, just some like 50s rock and roll track with Klaus playing bass, and they flew Ringo in to play the drums.
Right.
But it was just a bunch of old gear, and Paul's like, "Oh, this is the piano I did whatever on, and this is
the old Mellotron.
Here's the
and all those
Mellotron
cool
from
things.
Strawberry
Yeah.
Fields," and he ended up with all that gear because the guys at EMI just said, "Well, we don't need this anymore."
And I've heard from the people who worked at Abbey Road, sometimes he maneuvers his way in too to buy things.
Yeah,
Like he really wants to buy his favorite U-47 from Abbey Road, and they couldn't really say no.
yeah,
They had a few dozen left. But he would, sometimes negotiate to buy something that wasn't otherwise for sale to most people. And of
yeah.
course
He's got a little more sway. That's
They
right.
loved him, and he always kept working there through the 70s and 80s and 90s and current days. He still does stuff there. So while not everything is recorded there, he's got his own studios and goes to places in LA and stuff too. It's cool that he does return there quite often and do things.
Yeah, I saw some other clip of him doing something at EMI. What was it?
Is it the Chaos and Creation
Yeah,
at Abbey
that's it.
Road with
Yeah.
Nigel Godrich?
Yes, that
And
was
he's
it.
explaining bits about his new record at the time. You probably found it on YouTube called Chaos and Creation. And he shows you a bit how they do layers on a 4-track, and he shows you how they built songs in the Beatles days. Some cool stuff, yeah.
Yeah, it was really interesting stuff.
There is a book that it came out in England last week, and I don't know if anybody can get it here yet unless you want to buy the import, but it will be released in America in October, and it's Abbey Road, the greatest studio in the world is what it's called.
Oh, yeah.
And a book company did this book using the full resources of EMI. EMI is the company that owns Abbey Road, the label, and they have this huge archive. So these people, for the first time maybe ever, had unrestricted access to the photos and documents in there.
Wow.
So they've got, we didn't have that, no one does, but they had full access. So they have these amazing studio photos, all these pictures. It's not so Beatles heavy. There's a few pages on the Beatles maybe, but the Beatles are a slice in 80 years of recording at Abbey Road. And they've got Pink Floyd, of course. They've got all this cool stuff, but it's a really good job, in my opinion, and I'm really picky about those things. Really good job in
That's cool.
covering the long history of Abbey Road. It will be out in America in October, so look for that big, heavy book, and it's really cool. If you feel like digging deeper, it's got a lot of cool stuff. It's not so technical. It's more about the overview, and
Yeah.
Ken Scott has 2 pages in it, which is amazing. George Martin has 2 pages in it, so
Oh,
it's
yeah.
good. So,
Very nice.
And it's not so much about any specific thing. There's talks about the people. There's talks about facilities and what they do. Talk about the artists and different trends in music, because opera was big for a while there.
Yeah.
Classical music
Classical
was big
music.
for a while.
And
Yeah.
then a lot of, didn't they do a lot of spoken word stuff?
And
there?
comedy was huge there. So, yeah.
Yeah, that was George Martin's thing, wasn't it?
He was a comedy producer kind of until the Beatles. He did music as well, but the Beatles were a detour for him.
Yeah.
But for those of you that know the story, Brian Epstein came down to try to get the Beatles a record deal, and he visited the other producers. There were 3 of them at Abbey Road who did pop music, and they didn't like the Beatles, at least in the tapes they heard. So the Beatles were not signed to EMI, and he had one more shot because Decca and the other big labels had turned the Beatles down
There were
too.
like 10 labels turned
And so
down.
finally, the 4th producer, who was on vacation at the time, was George Martin, who largely did comedy, symphonic, experimental records, and didn't usually do that kind of group pop stuff. And then he came back, and Brian Epstein convinced him, and that's another story to be told later,
Yeah.
convinced him that he should sign the Beatles. And George wasn't really that into it, but he did sign the Beatles, and look what happened.
Yeah, George wasn't even a hot shot at
Yeah.
EMI. It was just a...
He was successful, but working and
Second
not
rate,
the top,
yeah.
But very talented, of course, so did great with it.
Sorry to play all the time. Trying to play really quiet.
Well,
And
that's
a
a good
lot of
sign.
these guys are tuned in to listen to the guitar too.
How many of you have a guitar in your hands while you're watching?
Ooh. Good question. How many of you don't have pants on while you're watching? I don't. I have shorts on. I just put on a couple of Strymon pedals here to give it some room.
People have ventured into cabinet talk all of a sudden quickly. Somebody's got guitar and pants on, which
Yeah.
is nice. But it's a good sign that you're loving the app enough to play it. Subconsciously, you're still into it.
I'm just
and that's
noodling
good.
the whole time. The other thing that I ran into last week on YouTube is mid-70s footage of Linda Ronstadt.
Oh, yeah. Fantastic.
I forgot, how adorable she was.
Yeah.
But
So
because I had a
cute.
huge crush on her in like 1976.
Most boys did, I think, yeah.
But how limitless her voice was.
She's really
And it
strong.
was alive because I went to see Peter, business partner, brother Peter here, and down in Orange County playing with Cheryl. and they were going to close the show with "You're No Good."
Oh yeah,
and I was thinking, wow, Cheryl, that's a pretty ambitious tune to sing, and she nailed it.
She does have a great voice.
And but then I started just looking at Linda doing it, and I just forgot how she just floats around effortlessly up in a range that humans can't even normally get to, and she's just there kind of swinging her arms and looking like, yeah, whatever, I can do this in my sleep. And it was Waddy Wachtel and Andrew Gold playing guitar.
If you haven't heard it in a while, try to find a good version. I'm sure MP3s would be fine, but better if you can find it on CD or something. But You're No Good by Linda Ronstadt is an amazing production. I think Andrew Gold was the session player on that. I don't remember if it was George Massenburg producing. Yeah, and so it's an absolutely fantastic. The hi-hat's great, the kick drum's great, the guitar parts are great, the backing vocals are perfectly placed. It's one of my, if not my favorite recording. It's one of the best I've ever heard.
But now I've had that progression in my head the whole time.
So speaking of that, and I'm going to send you off in another direction, I was looking at some Elton John stuff on YouTube.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
And I found a related artist who we all know did a duet with him was Kehew D. And that's what most people know about her, is that one song, which is kind of a sweet, chirpy pop song.
Yeah, what was that song?
It's, you know what it is?
I know exactly what it is, but it's in the...
Don't Go Breaking My Heart.
Don't Go,
Huge hit
right.
from 1976. And everyone knows it, but if you find a YouTube video from Kehew D in 1974, here it is, I just wrote it out for you.
Bunch of shirt there, yeah.
It's I Got the Music in Me, 1974, live, and it was absolutely amazing. Her voice is 17 times better than I thought it was, and the band is rocking. It's a great song you've probably heard somewhere before, but it's one of those good discoveries that really turned me on to something that I'd not heard before, and I went out and tried to find the CDs and stuff of it. But another great production, another great thing, but live versions sometimes really hook you up to things as well, too.
Let me answer the amp questions. I want to get a 212-65 cab. What do you think of a greenback with a blue? Well, we were talking about this earlier. The greenback is a lot lower SPL than a blue, so you're just going to hear the blue. I personally don't think the greenback is the best choice for our gear, because you're leaving a lot of frequency response on the table that the greenback can't do.
It has a very...
It's a narrow mid-range
sound, which is very, for some people in guitar, that's what they will like, but it loses some low end on purpose.
Yeah, and there's no sparkle to it
at
all. I mean, it's creamy, and that's cool, but you can kind of EQ that in.
Now you're talking about greenback with the blue. You mean when they mix them together in a cabinet, like things like Matchless would do?
Well, we do that. Most of our cabinets are the G12H30 and the Alnico Blue.
A mix of each,
because they have the exact same SPL. Matchless mixes the H and the greenback.
Right. So
and then they take some of the glue off the surround to kind of make it sound a little different.
Flex a little better.
Yeah. I don't like mixing SPLs. I think what you end up with is an unbalanced sound.
Their concept was to do that one speaker works in the low range better, one speaker works in the high range better. But then which one do you mic if you're going for a sound and things like that too? But I see the point of it.
Well, Matchless did a great job with it, but I've seen a lot of other people. I've done it myself, just goofing off, and it works with the right amp, but I don't think it'll work well with ours. I've tried it here before. I've stuck, greenbacks in here just because I ran out of H's and I needed to play something. Yeah. It's okay. It's not bad. There's nothing wrong with it. If you listen to one of our 212 cabinets side by side, the way we sell them, versus that combination, I think you would always choose the way we do it better. It's not going to sound bad at all, and if that's the only one you have, you'll be happy with it.
It's funny, my first good amp I bought when I was a kid, not a kid, but teenager, was a Blackface Fender Deluxe. And I remember buying it and then getting home and getting upset because there was no distortion knob on it.
There's no distortion at all.
So I had that amp for 20-some years, 25 years. Turned out to be one of my favorites of all time. But I didn't know when I bought it. I just knew a Fender was good, so I paid for it.
That's right.
But when I got it from this friend of mine, he had put a PV Scorpion speaker in it, and I went, that's going to come out. And he said, I dare you to try a bunch of speakers in there and tell me it sounds better. And I went through every speaker I could find in the PV Scorpion. Not a Plus or one of those weird high voltage ones. Sounded great in that amp.
Wow, that's cool.
And it's an interesting choice. I was like, who would have thought of that? And I don't know if they still make them or not, but it was one of those.
They don't make them like they did.
It was a very mid-rangey but thick great sound in that little amp.
Well, you know, the original Peavey stuff was, you know, you think of Peavey now as being really a bargain basement sort of choice, but it really wasn't then.
No.
I mean, there were big bands touring with Peavey stuff.
Queen and people like that. A lot of people had
Leonard Skinner, of course, was the flagship for them, but they were all made in Mississippi, and it was all, you know. I went to Meridian when I worked at Rhythm City in Atlanta. We drove over there to look at it. It's a great factory, really smart guys, all that kind of stuff. They did say, though, you know, we come up with, I played prototype bands, and it sounded fantastic. And like, when are you going to make this? They said, oh, never. I'm like, why? Because it costs $300 to make it or something, and Hartley's going to come in and say, now make it for $100. Yeah. But they had really bright people there doing really good things. But his business model was really smart. It's like, I want to make a reliable amp for people who can't afford a Fender or a Marshall. Where I grew up in Missouri, you know, you could go buy a special 30 Peavey for $199 or a deluxe cost $500.
Right.
You know, when I was a kid, it's like, well, okay, I'm 14.
And for things like PA systems and basses, they had amazing range that other people didn't have.
Everyone used PVPA systems on the road when I was a kid.
And bass rigs, which were high powered and didn't break up, and they sounded good.
Yeah, right.
People knock it, but it's so funny. I used to joke about that. I said to a friend of mine, I said, most PV amps are quite good and have a bad reputation, and most Marshalls were pretty bad and had a good reputation.
Yeah, I PV. You know, I can't make a lot of judgments on the show. He's got a business model that works really well, but none of it's really made here anymore. And
all my life, though, I've dug through weird gear, and there was a PV amp that used to come in a rack. It was a rack-mounted flight-cased amp with knobs on it from the 80s, and it sounded quite good. I sold one to a guy that played with Brian Ferry. He said, I have 3 of them. It's all I use on tour and on stage. Really? It's super strong, really well built. And I plugged it in at the shop, and we were trying it against High Watts and Marshalls and Selmers and all these cool Voxes, and we're like, it's as good as any of the amps we love. Yeah. And it's $250 because nobody cares.
That's right.
And then they did all kinds of stuff other people weren't trying at the time, like the VTMs that had switches for modifying gain when no one had switchable circuits on an amp. It was really interesting.
No, they have really good engineers there, really smart guys. It was not... we make all the jokes about PV because they're from, Mississippi, and that brings a lot of baggage. But
a lot of stuff was just simple solid-state cheap circuits. It wasn't fancy. It was just simple stuff.
Well, they were building to a number, and it was a good business model at work. But the whole point of that was there were some really good speakers they made.
There's also the point of when you go bother to listen to stuff instead of judging by the name. Maybe that logo is weird for you, or this company is. But you never know. Maybe somebody makes a Trace Elliott bass amp that's the ultimate guitar amp until somebody tries it. And we used to go around all the time, and that's how people found out about Gretsch amps and Supros. They were the jokey, nobody wants them amps.
Silvertones.
Yeah. And then suddenly people are saying, well, what's a Selmer? Who cares about those things? They're amazing.
I love Selmers. Selmer treble and bass was
one of the great amps.
I bought a Selmer treble and bass Crocskin amp when I lived in London because it was at Chandler's.
Right.
In the get this freaking thing out of here pile.
Right. Yeah.
No one wanted it, and I liked it because it looked funny because it had crocodile skin on it.
Yeah.
And I was playing in little bands, and man, you turn that thing up, it sounded fantastic. It was like a British Fender, and that's really what inspired. I had that amp here, and that's what inspired me to make the Royal Albert.
Wow.
That's what I based it on. And everybody's like, "How do you bridge that gap?" And I'm like, "Selmer treble and bass."
Yeah.
Great amp.
It sat there next to the Marshalls and the High Watts and all these other amps for years. We always know the big names, but if you open your ears to different guitars...
Hey, Peter Stroud just logged in.
There he is.
Hey, Peter. What's up, buddy?
And then the other one, like trainer amps, nobody cared about those from Canada for years. Trainer amps are amazing sounding when they're good. Mm-hmm. You sometimes have to tweak them a bit, but...
Peter is a big... Selmer guy too. Peter is the one.
I love him.
Peter had a couple of the later ones, the Mark IIs and Mark IIIs at his house. Do you still have those Selmers, Peter?
Our friend Michael Lockwood, who plays with Lisa Marie Presley, he's also happened to be married to her.
Yeah, he got inside that organization.
He's a big Selmer guy. Loved Selmers when many people didn't.
You still have the Mark II. Yeah, that's a great amp, isn't it? Hey, everybody, it's Peter Stroud, my business partner. Are you out on the road right now, Peter? And we were just talking about how I went down to see you in Orange County a couple weeks ago, and I still have.
I got the music in. Oh, what you were doing?
No,
You're No Good. Leonard Ronstadt. Yeah.
Got a little Strymon reverb here. I looked at all the clips of you guys playing that on stage too. You guys did a great job of that.
Yeah, it's a great track with good arrangements. Just got home.
Yeah, I saw you guys. Someone posted this morning a bunch of pictures of you guys playing in Vegas. Is that where you just got back from? Like at Caesar's Palace or something. If you guys haven't seen this tour, go check it out. Cheryl's in really good form.
Good.
She's happy. You know, when she's singing and she's really emoting and having good, and she looks really, really good, like happy and healthy. And I think having 2 children and living in Nashville is really treating her well.
Is my good buddy and drum idol Jeremy Stacy still playing drums?
No, that's what I was just getting to. So, Peter, you unfortunately can't speak, so I get to talk over you.
Right.
So Peter had this band in Nashville called Big Hat. And it was him and Audley Freed, and Fred Eltringham is a drummer for the Wallflowers, and is Rick's last name Barnes? Is that his name? He was a bass player in Lynyrd Skynyrd, young guy, you know, the new guy.
Yeah.
And they were cutting tracks one at a time, and it was really, really, really good Southern rock. And Cheryl wanted to, you know, get the band back together after her
hiatus, yeah.
Well, she did a tour with Doyle and those guys, did her Blue Eyed Soul thing, and she wanted to get her kind of rock and roll band back together. And so she basically, Robert Kearns, thank you.
Yeah.
Why did I say Rick? What am I talking about? Robert Kearns, I apologize. So she hired his band. You know, basically,
right.
You know, Peter's been the MD with Cheryl for a long time. But so it's Peter and Audley Freed, who are just 2 of my favorite guitar players in the world. If you guys go out on YouTube and look for Cry of Love, his band that he had in the late 80s through the 90s, and he's just ridiculous. You know, great player. And Peter, and they're both from North Carolina. And so they're like these 2 hot rod guys from the same region, and they play together so well, and you can just see that they spur each other
chemistry
on.
And connection.
Yeah, and oddly, like Peter, is just one of the most lovable people you'll ever meet. So it's just, I think that vibe is coming across on stage.
Really good.
And you can just see it in their playing. Cheryl's happy, and it's Fred, right? Fred Eltringham from the Wallflowers is such a swinging, groovy Ringo Starr kind of drummer.
Good.
And it just changed. It sounded like they sound like a rock and roll band, you know, because they've always been really good, and they were one of those sort of like A-list pop rock bands. Right. But now they sound like a rock and roll band.
There's a thing that happens with some groups, and it's just combinations of chemistry, and there is no preferred version. It's always just try it out and change it up. And I can see where artists sometimes too. It's like even just for the freshness of it, you want to kick it a little bit and just try something different.
Right.
It's painful sometimes when it's your favorite band and it's been, you know, so-and-so's the bass player since 1969, but...
Yeah, people are bringing up here, Audley played with the Black Crowes for a long time, and Frampton and the Dixie Chicks and stuff. And, Fred's awesome. I was so blown away by the show. And Cheryl, I hope you're not watching, because I'm going to make a confession. I just go down there to see Peter because he's my brother and I love him. And I was there, you know, I was, let's just hang out backstage and watch the show from the side of the stage so I can look at all the 65 amps. And after the first song, it was apparent we needed to go out and sit in the audience, because this is a great band. It's a really good tour. It's really fun. So Cheryl's back on fire. So if you get a chance, go out and see it.
I have a story about her that's kind of complimentary. It's very complimentary, actually, and kind of cool. Is that one time she was trying to buy an old keyboard, a weird one that people were using around town, a weird old organ called an Optagon, and she said, "Can you find me one of those?" And I said, "Sure, but I really don't like them. They break all the time."
Yeah.
And it's nothing worse than something you love that's unreliable. It drives you crazy. It'll ruin your life. So I said, "Well, I'll get what you want. I'll find it what I could." And I found one in great condition that had all these discs that go with it to give you the sounds to use. So you got a lot of options. Then I called her and said, "Okay, I spent 2 days working on it. It's ready to do." And she came down to see it. And as she was driving down, it broke. And she showed up and I said, "Sorry, I just spent 2 days on it. I don't really want to spend my life trying to fix these. And then as soon as you take it home, it's going to break again." And she was all upset. Like, "I really want it to work." And I said, "Me too." And so we spent on the floor an hour together working on it.
Oh, really? She rolled up her
chipped
sleeves
in
and worked with
we
you?
went on it, and we could not get the thing to go. And I said, see, I don't want to charge anybody money for something that's just going to break when you get home.
That's right.
And I said, you just have to, here, take the discs, find another one, and we'll make it go.
Yeah. That's funny. So what I left off for this whole thing is, so this band is Peter's band, and he's the MD again. So kudos to Peter. You've just made this sound so good, and it was really strange because for the first time ever, all the guys in the band were calling Peter the boss man. Behind his back. Oh, Peter's a great boss. Oh, we love having Peter as a boss. And I was like, so Cheryl's not the... No, Peter's the boss. So she's really handed the reins over to Peter, and it's turned out so good.
You know what? That's a good sign of good management. In fact, in anywhere, so you don't have to be control freak, and many artists are, but she's obviously confident enough to know I hired the right person to take care of this job, and he knows what we need. Mm-hmm. And it really lets them free things up for worrying about the rest of it,
and it
which
shows,
is a lot to do. Yeah.
She's so Cheryl, always very nice person and all these sorts of things, but she was. You could see on stage she was always concerned that everything was perfect.
Right.
And if somebody hit a clinker or missed a cue or something, she would always, give him the stink eye really quick. And man, she's just out front dancing the whole time. Right. And, she looks great. She's in Nashville, so I think she's eating.
Great.
And, just really fun. Anyway, I'll go on and on about it. Josh Grange is the steel player. That's right. Yes. Josh was great. Nice guy, too. Like, good bunch of guys. Peter surrounds himself with good people, so. Well, anyway, it's almost getting time to be at lunch with Dan Boul.
I think it's time for lunch. Yeah, it feels like it.
Are we going to go over to Salome again and eat
our
Indian
favorite
food?
Indian restaurant. It's so good. It's good for you, too. So tonight, here's a funny thing. I was driving by a place called the Baked Potato, which is a long-time club, really tiny, but really great people play there.
Yeah.
And it's got its roots in kind of jazz and different kinds of music come through there. But a lot of people who are huge guitar players love to play there. And it's a little room where you bump elbows with the audience. They're literally sitting at tables. You could throw a piece of paper and hit the wall. It's that small. I mean, it's tiny.
Yeah.
But
it's like a New York hotel room.
Tonight it says Jerry Vivino, guitar player from Conan O'Brien. I was like, oh no, it's Jimmy Vivino. He's great and
maybe
he's a cool guy. No, it's sad.
His brother Murray.
So hopefully somebody will call maybe I'll call the Baked Potato and make sure they change the sign before he comes up because he's a really cool guy.
Jimmy is a sweetheart.
Really good guy.
I need to invite him over here. He used to use our gear all the time in New York.
He lives 6 blocks from here.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He moved here for the show and he got a nice house in North Hollywood. So.
Yeah, he was always renting our stuff for studio work because he was getting compensated to use the gear that he was using on the television show. And he was always a super nice guy. And I remember when Peter, this is relates to you, Break Non. Yes, it's good. I wish you were here too, man. Come on. When Conan did the Tonight Show for a minute, Cheryl was one of the first musical guests. And we had hung out with Vivino there, and he was such a sweetheart.
He's a great player too, and he keeps a little bit of excitement in the show. It's not just session player stuff. I mean, he keeps it exciting and likes to rock out, which
and
I like a lot
his little
too.
band,
they're great.
Sick. If you've ever been there, Jimmy sings nonstop for 4 hours, and he rotates band members because they wear out.
Yeah,
it's like a polo pony. You know, you've done your chucker, now it's on to the next one. So there's always 2 or 3 drummers and 2 or 3 bass players and 2 or 3 guitar players there, and Jimmy doesn't take a break. Doesn't talk in between songs and sings his bald little ass off. And it's just fantastic. And he plays the whole time. And these guys are dropping like flies and they rotate in,
One thing I didn't know, which I get to see a rehearsal one time, is that Conan loves to just grab his guitar and play with him all the time.
Conan's a decent guitar player, isn't he?
He's a big guitar nut. And he loves it. So when they're working out sketches and things like that, he's always got a guitar around and picks it up and goes over and plays with the guys and jams along. It's a nice... perk of being the boss.
That's right. Yeah, what are you going to say? Hey, fuck off, I'm working.
He's going to do it. He's going to play. I think actually it'd be nice to see him play on the show, though, to you're good enough to show people that you have this other talent. He's quite good at it. So.
Peter, didn't you play with Conan for a minute? Didn't he come check out your guitar? That's right. Corky Lang was there from Mountain that night. Wow. We went and saw them play. It was at the old, it closed now, the one on Ventura, Cozy's.
Oh, yeah.
It's out of business now, I think. But didn't Conan come over and check out your guitar and hang out with you for a minute, Peter? He was wanting one of your Les Pauls or something?
Speaking of out of business, I'm going to see Yes in Procol Harum tonight at the Gibson Amphitheater.
Yes.
Soon to be gone.
Soon to be gone?
Yeah, I think they're taking it out.
They're removing the venue? Gibson is removing
Yeah.
it?
Or they don't own it. Gibson just paid to have their name on the sign.
Oh, they licensed it. Yeah.
I think it's Universal Studios that owns it, and they could really use the land for other things. So I'm hoping. I love that place. You mentioned Linda Ronstadt. She did one of the very first gigs there when
it was outdoors.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Or one of those. Sinatra was the first roof gig or the first outdoor gig. I can't remember what it was.
Yeah,
but
when it actually was an amphitheater.
And I spent many good times there in that building.
Wow, I didn't know that. That's sad to hear.
I don't think it's announced because they don't want people will be upset. It's a great.
We're
place.
announcing it here. We're up over 60,000 viewers a week now. So
ouch.
We're as much as like Channel 7.
We got to learn to speak. We got to learn to speak gooder English.
That's right. Talk gooder. I just got back from Missouri too, where I was learning to say "fixin' to" and "pert near" again. Yeah, we got as much viewers as like Channel 7 in LA or something.
Steve Howe was killing when you saw him 2 years ago, and when I saw him 2 years ago, it was really terrible. But I think it was an off night. There must be something with the monitors. But I understand they're really good right now, and I'm anxious to see Procol Harum, which has always been a good band. Whoever's in the group, it changes, but it's always been a really good group. So we're enjoying a little prog rock today.
Is Ken gonna go see Procol Harum?
I don't know if he's back yet, but I don't know.
That's funny.
Yeah. I will put in a call because I think I know one person that has one ticket. People were fighting over it. And I invited my girlfriend, but she's busy working tonight, so I don't think she'd like it. So.
Sometimes it's good to go to a concert. Oh, I was just telling a story, Peter. Do you think I should tell the story about the Jeff Beck show with Farial on the show? Let's see, give him a second to respond here. It takes a second. It was just such a great story. It'd be a great way to end up. I'll play dirty guitar for a minute.
Somebody asked if it would do the crunchy Neil Young sound, and I don't know if this prototype is not in the Neil Young direction, is it? Hey, my.
It's a little too much, but that's four
He's got
dead.
the real dark deluxe tone in his thing, doesn't he?
Well, it's 6L6s, so you're still going to get a little bit of that character in there. All of his stuff. What's the other big drop D song?
The low string sounded amazing. Yeah. Let's hear that low string again on the setting on. Okay.
Oh, wrong channel.
There's the low string. Yeah. Nice.
Oh, yeah. I wish I had the foot switch working on this because I got right back down to.
There it is. It said the Universal closing was announced April 16th, and they're replacing it with the big Harry Potter ride. Wait. Peter says, tell the story.
Okay, so Peter and I go to see Jeff Beck at the Greek Theater, and we meet.
That's Beck for adults, not the Beck for kids.
Jeff Beck, yes, yeah. the elder Beck,
yeah.
And so Peter and I have been like dear friends for 25-ish years, maybe. Yeah, about 25 years right now. I think I met you 25 years ago right now, but we're also both semi-deaf guitar players. And we've been around each other. So our body language is sort of unusually intimate just because we've known each other for so long and we're dear friends. And, he's best man at my wedding, the whole thing. So when we're in loud environments, we're both talking to each other like this. We're right in each other's hair, basically, as if, we're brothers or lovers or whatever. And so John Shanks, and Farial Russell that runs Henson?
Don't know.
Henson Recording. She's the studio manager. Lovely, lovely girl. Really, really nice. And so John introduces Peter and to me to Farial and goes, "Oh, this is Peter's partner, Dan."
Oh, English.
And she had been watching us. We're at a concert and we're talking to each other. We're in each other's ears chatting like this. So the whole night she thought that we were partners, not business partners.
And in England that means you're lovers.
Right.
And staying together.
And so because of that, I got to see for the first time what happens to gay guys when the women feel there's no threat at all. She was amazingly friendly, very warm, very kind, no guard whatsoever. "Oh, honey, can I go get you a drink?" And just, sweet as can be, all over the place. It was absolutely hilarious. And I'm talking to John. I'm like, wow, she's really friendly. I have no idea what's going on. And Peter's like, yeah, man, she's great. She was sitting in my lap. Like this is just, nice girl. And then so we get a call the next day, and John calls from his office, and he's on speakerphone, and he's laughing his butt off, and Farial's going, "Stop, John, don't do it. Oh, my God, stop." I'm like, "Hey, what's up?" He goes, "Oh, yeah, Farial thought you guys were, partners, and I just broke the news to her that you're business partners, and you're both married with children." And she was so embarrassed, poor thing. So now it's a big joke every time we go into Henson. It's like, "Hey, partner, what's up?" But yeah, good concert story. But
it is funny. I did this exact same thing. Was at a Who show. The Pretenders were opening, and I met Chrissy Hind, who was one of my favorites. And she said, "Oh, you worked on our box set, and you worked on some of our records." I said, "Yeah, I mixed all the outtakes on these bonus tracks." I said, "With my partner," and I mentioned the producer.
Yeah.
And she went, "Oh." And of course,
come on in, have my food, have my liquor.
I think of her as an American because she's from America, but she lived in England for 30 plus years now, so she thinks English in her head. Yeah. And I thought I was in Texas talking to an American.
Right.
So later on, the word got back to me. She wanted to know if we were connected, these two guys, and somebody had to tell her, "No, that's just an American expression, of course." And in England, they say, "That's my mate," and in America, mating's a whole different thing.
Exactly. Yeah, mate means something verbal. I mean, it's a verb. What do you think of the sound of the prototype, Peter?
People have asked, does it have a name yet?
No, it doesn't.
Okay.
These names sort of come organically once you get familiar with them.
The Pollywog, the Rumpelstiltskin.
Yeah, your name is
Two-Eyed Joe.
Rachel.
Yeah.
It's just, I don't know.
Jehovah.
Doesn't it's the witness. But doesn't sound like 6L6s right here at all, does it?
The partner. That's good. Of course, we can't forget partner.
The partner. P-A-R-D.
Partner.
The clean sound was beautiful with the humbuckers.
Here's the thing. Turn off our mics for 10 seconds and let's hear that tone without our mics.
Let me turn our mics off. Yeah, there you go.
Nice.
Peter, I'm sure you could do this a lot more justice than I do, but you get the idea. It still needs some polish, and this isn't the final power transformer we're going to use, but...
Somebody wants to keep their empire but still afford this amp. It's always the question, isn't it? How to get more stuff without selling what you have.
Yeah.
You could sell half the empire.
You know what's funny we realized in this business? The most attractive quality of any piece of gear that you make is that you can sell it.
Yeah.
I mean,
Hopefully.
regardless of performance, like if I can just sell it quickly, then I like it. Yeah. But yeah, it does pretty good.
What's nice too, I think, about when I've worked for different manufacturers, different companies too, is when you've got a good product, you don't really need to hype it too much. You just say, here's what it does, and people decide that they want it, and that's a nice thing too.
Well, I always just, I got to make stuff that's useful.
But sometimes it takes an explanation. People might say, well, I've heard 50 amps at this amp show, and I've heard your amp. It's another good amp, but what should I listen for? What is your feature?
Yeah.
And part of your thing would be reliability, consistency, heat, humidity, and roadworthiness, things like that.
Touch responsive, dynamic, big, huge vocabulary.
And also to define what you want. This is not 16 effects loops and 22 channels and things like that. No MIDI input on the back.
Yeah.
And it's just also not a clone of somebody's Plexi Marshall too. It gives you a different world. So.
I still don't get that. Like, you can buy a clone for $2,500, or you can buy a Plexi for $1,500. Like, okay, I think I'll just buy the Plexi.
Well, one of them's hand wired, the other one's nose wired or something.
I don't understand it. Yeah, and no matter how bad your vintage amp is, $400 will fix anything.
Just about, yeah. Except the toe legs.
Yeah.
It's always the cosmetics are always trouble.
It's a fun amp. I really enjoy playing it. We still have, how much headroom does the clean channel have? Well, with this guitar, it's probably not going to have a whole lot. It's really more about decibels than it is numbers on the dial.
I like that name, The Stranger. But it's not stranger than most things, but it's a great name.
All of our amps are kind of full volume at 5.
Okay.
And then they just get dirtier after that. And so that's 5 right now, and that's, pretty much as loud as it's going to get.
Again, another style choice that you're making other people don't make, but it defines what you do.
I want to have this control.
Yeah.
I want to be able to be on the clean channel and push it.
Yeah. That's nice. Really good.
Yeah, it's like, turn off echo. Which sounds different than if I'm over here on this channel. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's more of a British kind of vibe over there. This is a big fat,
So how long from this stage until you have a product that you'll be selling?
It's pretty close now. I'd say we're probably... I'll be able to show the final version at the LA Amp Show.
Which is when?
October, first week in October.
Cool. Can't wait. That's fun.
I could finish this in a week if I had the time. We're that close. So.
Yeah.
That sounds like a Les Paul, doesn't it?
But we have time for lunch.
Yeah, let's go. Let's go eat.
That's good.
Yes, I'm going to call it the Unwed Indian Lesbian Mother for Jesus. Think that'll work? What do we got? So, last call. If you got any questions.
Was a consignment broker for vintage guitars who's local. I don't know. I really don't know. I mean...
Yeah, there's 2 guys that I know.
I know a lot. It's just a question of picking someone over someone else.
LA Vintage Gear. Look up LA Vintage Gear. That's Cliff Jones. And he moves gear really well. Really, really well. He's got a website. And, there's always... It depends on the gear. If it's vintage stuff, Norman will do it.
Yeah, and it depends on how perfect things are. Some people want stuff that's perfect, other people don't.
Right.
I've also found that if you have some more interesting or maybe unusual stuff, our friends at True Tone Music in Santa Monica have a lot of customers come through, and they, there's a lot of stock, so it always competes with what other things people have to sell.
But they do consignment down there.
Definitely, and they have a lot of visibility. That's why I thought it might be good. People come and go. I just heard about West LA Music selling out to Guitar Center here.
What?
The other one on Ventura.
West LA?
Bought by Guitar Center.
I heard they were building another Guitar Center
That's
in
where
Westwood.
it is going in. Well, no, this is the one on... no, somebody must know the details, but there's more stores coming and going.
Yeah, there's a new Guitar Center being built in West LA, which is like 5 miles from the one on Sunset.
Yeah.
Wow.
There's more guitars to sell, more pedal boards, all that stuff.
Now, Guitar Center didn't go bankrupt. Bain Capital bought them, and they will probably sell them after the election because they don't want anything to reflect on Mr. Romney.
Oh, he's got an amazing guitar that I would be crazy about.
What is it?
A
71
Medallion.
Gibson?
It's Michael Schenker's guitar from UFO, which is probably my favorite band.
Wow.
And I did sell years ago. He had 2 or 3 of them, and there are questions as to which is which. You have to document them, of course, and get that stuff going. But that's a pretty special guitar. It certainly should get some internet attention if you're going to sell it. And I know they were all repaired. I played that one when he was recording the Walk on Water UFO record. I went out and checked it out, and it was a fantastic guitar.
Wow.
But Michael had fallen in love with the Roadies guitar. And
really?
It has a big 4 on the front. If you guys ever see a tour picture with my friend Leon's guitar, Michael used it and never returned it, last I heard. But he was selling his old ones at the time to make some money because the new, found some other vintage V's that were better than his original, he thought.
When you get something that's that rare, actually the Burst Brother guys will give you really reasonable money for that.
And if he's looking for just consignment, that's pretty easy. It's not a risk for anyone. So
yeah,
you can talk to those guys, and they certainly do. Walk on Water, heavy hitter. It is true, a great record for an old band to come back and do something that good. He bought it from him, so there you go. Clearly stated, Michael Schenker's guitar. It would certainly need some proof. Before people buy stuff for big money, they always want some kind of proof.
Yeah, you got to have some provenance on it.
But it doesn't hurt. You can always go to Providence, Rhode Island, and just take a picture.
So I said to my wife. And once again, I'm going to say thanks to Dusty Wakeman for bringing over these microphones so that we don't have big, huge, clunky mics sticking out. Dusty felt sorry for me. And
I'd love to use that guitar sometime. We'll talk about it.
Yeah, actually, Eric Yar is this guy, and he lives over here in Sherman Oaks. So, Eric, with your permission, I'll hook you guys up on email.
I have some UFO secret information for you, too. I'll spill you in on, since he knows about that stuff. So.
Yeah, or you can come over and have lunch with us at Salome
That's right.
in North Hollywood. We're going to be there in about 15 minutes. Yeah, because I know you live 10 minutes away, so come on over and meet us for lunch if you want. If you buy a pizza. Oh, I thought you were buying a pizza last time.
I can only rent pizzas myself.
Yeah, right.
Or at least with an option,
I keep them for
to buy.
I keep them for 8 hours.
With a balloon payment at the end.
Oh, that's so good. I can't laugh though. My back's going to spasm if I do it.
Well, secret UFO info is secret right now, but it means that if you like the old stuff, I'm digging deep to find out if there's more that we've never heard.
I'm still stuck on the fact that Guitar Center is buying out West LA Music.
Yeah. Well, somebody's got to look this up and make sure it's right, because I've heard this from 2 people that it might just be the shop over here, and then you said they're building something in West LA, which is different. I don't know. I mean, it's rumor mill at this point, and I'm sure there's truth in it somewhere. But what the truth is, you've always got to figure it out.
I pinched a nerve or something in my back, so my left mid-trap is locked. It thinks that my shoulder blade should actually be touching my spine.
Oh, it's accurate. Was on West LA Facebook. So accurate to the point that we don't know what we're talking about. It's true.
West LA announces closing sale.
Yeah, I heard they're blowing it out. Everything is going away so that
all their recording gear. And
every
everything?
piece in the store is going to be sold so that they can close it, write the books up, and then Guitar Center will fill the store with new stuff.
That's really interesting. That's really interesting.
There you
Salome
go.
on Lancashire. Yeah, that's right. Lancashire,
some good curry.
Just north of Magnolia on Lancashire.
Excellent place. Love it.
Wow. Well, Peter Stroud, thank you for coming in.
Hey,
one thing I'm going to mention to you guys. I think in the next week I'm going to do an off show. I'm going to try the Google Hangout thing. They've just upped their capacity quite a bit, and I can have video guests. So Peter, if you're around, you and I can share a window remotely.
Cool.
I can have up to 6 guests video. So if you want to try,
like the Brady Bunch thing.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it looks like. They're all across the bottom, and then I can bring whoever's speaking up to the big. Well, it's closing its doors forever on August 4th, so it's already closed.
Unless you have a time machine.
Yep.
But then again, why would you need to go to West LA Music when you can go somewhere better?
They're already closed. Wow. So anyway, we're going to do an experiment. I want to try to do an experimental show on Google Hangouts. But the thing about it is, the bonus of that is that you, as the viewer, can watch it on my YouTube channel.
Nice.
So I get hammered on Ustream for data charges and all this kind of stuff because we're getting so many viewers, and the YouTube thing is wide open.
Great.
So you can watch it live on YouTube instead of coming here to Ustream as well. And so I'm going to give it a shot. I might be migrating over there sometime soon. So I have 2 computers here, so I could technically simulcast.
Stereo.
Yeah, that's right. We'll put one camera on me and the other one on me, and make it work. So I just want to drop that out. Brian, thank you for coming, man. It's so good to have you here like regularly.
It's fun. I mean, I'm so close. My studio's 4.5 blocks away.
We're becoming sort of the MI version of McNeil and Lehrer.
I know, that's funny. Thumbs up, thumbs down.
That's right. The movie guys, right?
Right.
Who are those guys?
Siskel and Ebert,
Siskel and Ebert.
and whoever they are.
Yeah, Siskel and Schmo. Well, thank you guys. Cheers, Peter. Great to see you, or at least see your typing. And it was fantastic hanging out with you a couple weeks ago. That was such a fun show. And I'll be back next week. I'll probably play the prototype again. Brian, you're, of course, always welcome to come by if you want to do it. And then I'm going to take Ken's offer up on bringing him back here. I just got to finish the book. I'm about 2/3 of the way through it right now. So.
And it was our friend Ken Scott who has a new book, Abbey Road to Ziggy Stardust, about his life in recording. And he's made so many great records. If you just Google him up, look up Ken Scott engineer or Ken Scott producer.
But he's brilliant at like sort of taking away all the layers of gloss and myth and just going, oh no, this is what it was like to work with these people and the gear and blah, 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 blah. And you feel like you're just sitting in the studio with them.
Right.
It's really, really well done.
And fairly honest, it's not all self-patting on the back, which I'm tired of in most books. People saying how great they are. He doesn't say that all the time. He says, this is good and that wasn't good and I didn't do well here, I did great there.
He gives just as much time to his screw-ups, and he's very open about, I started this project, next thing I know I wasn't on it. I assume they weren't happy with my work.
Or whatever,
he's
That's the real life lessons, though. You can always do well, but you usually don't always do well. You go up and down in life, so.
That's right. Yeah, and it's a great book. If you get a chance, go check it out. Anyway, I'm starving. It's 2:00 already.
Lunchtime.
Well, man, time flies when you're having fun. Thank you again, Brian.
Fun.
And we'll see you guys. We're going to go over to Salome in North Hollywood if you want to show up and buy us lunch. All right, fellas, take care.
Bye-bye.
We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.